But we changed plans because instead of looking ahead, we did decide it would be right to look back and give a tribute to a person. And I get emotional with this, so I hope you'll bear with me. To spend some time talking about a person who had a huge, huge influence on Scratch, and that's Seymour Papert. I think Seymour had just touched so many people in so many ways around the world through his work, and engaging us in rethinking the ways that we think about learning and children and technology. Through the work he did with the Logo programming language, the first real programming language for kids, which was a direct inspiration for Scratch. But more generally, his ideas have sort of sparked so many of the things that we've been doing with Scratch. So it felt it would be good to sort of spend some time reflecting on Seymour. I was so fortunate and so lucky to be able to work closely with Seymour for many years and have him as a mentor and as a colleague and a friend. I know there are other people in the audience, too, who worked very, very closely with Seymour from the early days. From the early days when he was first inventing, had a team here at MIT working on the original logo, which actually was this year's the 50th anniversary of Logo. Is right now. And he worked very closely with Cynthia Solomon, who was there as a close collaborator from the very, very beginning, and did the project. He wrote the paper, 20 Things to Do with the Computer. And I know there are other people here from the original Logo effort who did work in schools trying out the initial versions on these big, expensive computers with kids to see what was possible, and then wrote about it. I know Brian Harvey is here, and Dan and Molly Watt, Michael Temple. There's a whole collection of people from the early days. Brian Silverman, who was one of the Seymour's closest collaborators and led the implementation and development of Logo and spreading it to the world through the work he did at Logo Computer Systems Incorporated and elsewhere. We have some of Seymour's students here, like Claudia Uria, who work closely and continue to spread Seymour's ideas. Actually, I'm very happy that Seymour's daughter, Artemis, is also here. So for some of us, who work so closely with Seymour, and but I know for many of you, as many of you know, Seymour had a very bad accident 10 years ago. He was hit by a motorbike in Hanoi, and and never fully recovered. So he hasn't been able to be a full participant in the last 10 years. So many people here, really have never directly interacted with Seymour. Some of you who are new to this might not know much about Seymour at all. So especially for those, I want to spend some time talking about Seymour's contributions and some of the ways in which Seymour's ideas and his work directly influenced us with Scratch and continue to directly influence us with Scratch. I want to start, I was going to show a video because I want you to sort of, at least hear Seymour talking is important. I'm going to show a video that was made just in this past year. It was made by the Lego company in recognition of the 30th anniversary of the Lego company's collaboration with the Media Lab. Was Lego 30 years ago approached Seymour because they saw what he was, they were inspired by his ideas about children and learning, and they thought there'd be a good connection, and indeed there was. So the Lego company then became a close collaborator. Seymour became the first Lego professor at MIT. They endowed a professorship. And we've worked together in wonderful ways over the years. I have the great honor when Seymour became an emeritus professor, they renamed the chair in Seymour's honor, the Lego Papert Professor. So actually, I'm so very honored now to be the Lego Papert Professor, which feels so right because in some ways the two biggest influences of my life, my prior Papert and Lego. And in some ways, two of the biggest influences on Scratch. So I thought it'd be nice to show this video. It's around a 7-minute video that talks about the 30 years. For those who have never been to Media Lab, it also tells you a little about the introduction to the Media Lab. But more important, an introduction to Seymour and his ideas and how it influenced the interaction and collaboration with the Lego company. But then I want to talk more about how we built on those ideas in our work on Scratch.
The great thing about the computer is that it can bring together in one experience the aesthetic, the personal, the bodily, the analytic, the mathematical, the abstract. All these things happen in one combined, integrated experience.
In 1984, there was a television program in the Danish television called Talking Turtle. And I happened to watch that, and there was this charismatic person there telling about what children could do with computers. That guy was Seymour Papert.
What we really have to think about is what produces involvement, engagement, what grabs the individual.
What interested me was Seymour Papert's view on children and how they can learn through experimentation, how they can learn through play.
Education has very little to do with explanation. It has to do with engagement, with falling in love with the material.
I was absolutely fascinated, and I said, go and get contact with him. We have to talk to him.
In 1984, I was already working with Seymour Papert, helping to connect Lego bricks to the computer so that children could control their Lego constructions from the computer. Then out of the blue, Seymour got a letter from top executives at the Lego company.
Seymour, whose life's work was children and learning, met Keld, whose life work was children, and the two of them really hit it off.
We started working together, and that's lasted now more than 30 years. The MIT Media Lab has 25 different research groups doing all different types of creative, innovative work.
In my work, I combine arts and crafts with electronics to create artistic, expressive pieces.
The Cityscope platform was developed to allow people to engage with urban planning.
This is the first device ever to make it easier for people to walk.
The researchers and students here at the Media Lab, they're constantly experimenting, trying new things, building complex structures from simpler parts. They're doing it in a Lego spirit. My own group is called the Lifelong Kindergarten Group, where we focused on designing new technologies and activities to engage people in creative learning experiences. A big part of our collaboration with the Lego company is sharing ideas.
We explore technology and how it can impact the human potential. From our perspective, primarily through play.
The Makey Makey is a little circuit board we invented here that lets kids transform anything in their world into a controller for games or music.
One of the things that we always talk about is we want to solve big challenges and big problems, and in order to do that, you have to be innovative. And I think to be innovative, you need people who are sort of not afraid to try new things, make mistakes.
So that means we need to help children become creative thinkers.
The goal of these creative workshops is really to give children an opportunity to come up with their own ideas, imagine something, and then figure out how to design it.
We should still keep this plate, but take this one.
They need to be constantly exploring, experimenting.
It works! Whoa, oh my God.
Through natural discovery, by testing things, by tinkering, by experimenting, by creating.
They're using Lego motors and sensors, and then if it doesn't work the way they want, they start revising it.
So you have to kind of adjust the motor power so it actually has enough power to knock the lights off.
So they're really learning through having a goal, imagining something, and then bringing it to life. So rather than just thinking of the computer of something that I think, what am I supposed to do? They start thinking, what do I want to do with it? They start getting new ideas.
The children are learning to program. They're learning about motion. Above all, they're learning the scientific knowledge is not something separate from their passion for toys.
After a couple of years of cooperation, it crystallized that we really want to make a set for the schools.
We worked for several years on designing prototypes, testing out with children in classrooms.
When the elevator comes up, it'll reverse the direction and it'll call elevator again. I grouped up now. Get it?
We could then, in 1988, market the first product that had come out of the cooperation, which was called Lego TC Logo.
as electronics got smaller and lighter and cheaper, we realized we could build the electronics of the computer directly into a Lego brick.
Seymour, at a point in time, probably maybe in the early 90s, started talking about the intelligent brick.
I remember many occasions walking into Kel's office with the latest prototype that we've developed at MIT, and you'd see the gleam in Kel's eyes. We would start talking about it, but he would immediately want to get his hands on the prototype. We ultimately came up with a final version that the Lego company came out with in 1998 as Lego Mindstorms. One thing that surprised us was that even though we had designed it primarily for children, initially a lot of the sales were to adults. They would build into robots as part of robot competitions. They would build piano-playing robots that would walk on the piano keyboard and play, plant-watering robots that would test out when the soil was dry, dancing robots that would dance to different music. It just opened up all sorts of new creative design possibilities for children around the world.
We can't say what children will need in the future. Adults shouldn't be saying what children ought to learn, but I think we can say something about how children should be learning.
Everyone should be able to learn to express their ideas with the computer, and that's what coding is all about.
When you say coding, people think of like numbers that are super complicated and stuff that even I don't understand, but like Scratch is much easier.
Scratch is a visual programming language for kids that we developed here. These elements on the screen actually look like Lego blocks, and you snap them together, and very quickly you can make things start happening.
Programming is like playing with Lego bricks. It's the same structured and very creative process.
You know that it can be done. It's just a question of how you find the way. That is exactly the same as your Lego experience.
It's constrained in a way that's really easy for kids to get started, but it's open-ended, so people can build anything.
It tells us the Lego idea is alive in the physical world, but it's very much alive in the digital world, and that's highly inspirational for us.
As I think about the future of our relationship with the Lego company, it's not just about bringing products to the world, but bringing change to the world. We're always thinking of Seymour's vision of a world where children can take control of their own learning, to use the materials around them to explore the world, to understand the world in new ways, and to understand themselves in new ways.
We think the approach of the Media Lab to learning is the way of the future, and that's why we take so much inspiration from this partnership, because we think it really defines how education, but also informal learning, should happen in society.
The fact that we share these values about creativity, imagination, play and learning belongs together. That is something that has kept us together for all these years.
This is where it leads to a fundamental change in the nature of the learning.
So I want to spend a few minutes just reflecting on some of the ideas that at least I took away from Seymour and the ways that they've influenced us as we've sort of worked on Scratch and other projects. And as difficult as it might be, I sort of boiled it down. I sort of grabbed 6 phrases that I thought sort of captured some of the spirit of things that I learned from Seymour, and so I want to talk a little about those. So the first, Seymour, in talking about his approach to learning, he used the term constructionism, and that sort of grew out of Seymour had worked with Jean Piaget, the great sort of epistemologist and philosopher and psychologist in Switzerland, in understanding children's learning. And Piaget, Seymour learned from Piaget about the way that children actively build up their knowledge structures through their interactions in the world. And what Seymour layered on top of that was that one of the best ways for help kids to build up that knowledge was to engage them in building things in the world. And Seymour saw building in the world in a very broad way. It wasn't just building with Lego bricks, although that's one way. It was also building sandcastles on the beach, or building animations on the screen with Logo or with Scratch, or building and creating a story or a poem. It was all about sort of taking your ideas and getting your ideas out to the world where they could be shared with others. And I think that was sort of the core of things that Seymour was talking about. And he sometimes would contrast constructionism with what he termed was too common in the world with instructionism. People thinking that the way to help people learn was to have better instruction. And of course, instruction can be a worthwhile thing, but he said that's not the way that we're going to transform young people's lives, is by just coming up with better ways of instructing, better ways of delivering information, better ways of delivering instruction. Instead, we have to change it and create situations where children can design, create, express themselves. And that's really what he did through his life. In many ways, the current maker movement very much grows out of Seymour's ideas about learning through making, creating, building. And you really should see Seymour as the patron saint of the maker movement. And I do think similarly with Scratch, had a big influence. With all the work going on in the world these days around coding, a lot of it really isn't about making things. You see a lot of things around coding where it's learning certain concepts or solving a certain puzzle. And again, there's some value to that. But I think Seymour would always argue that the way for people to really become engaged with something and to engage with the ideas in a deep way is be doing it while creating a project. So in Scratch, the project is the core unit in Scratch. And it's because we want people to create things and share things with others. And that sort of comes right out of Seymour's ideas. The second Seymour idea that I thought of was he talked about objects to think with. And he would emphasize that the objects in a child's world have a big influence on the way they make sense of the world. The fact that we're born with two hands helps us in understanding symmetry and pairs. So the things that we have around us influence how we think about things. One reason he liked the collaboration with the Lego company was it was an object in children's world that could help them in understanding the world and building in the world. In Seymour's work with Logo, he really took that seriously and building on his own personal experiences. In the foreword to Seymour's classic book, Mindstorms, he talks about his own childhood experience with gears. The foreword is called Gears of My Childhood. And he talks about the way that he grew up in South Africa, like Taran, and was oftentimes in the bush with his father, who was an entomologist, and loved car parts and truck parts, and became fascinated with gears. And looking back, he said there was so much of mathematics that he learned from playing with gears. But another important part there is not just learning the mathematical concepts, which he learned from gears, which he did, but importantly, in that foreword, Seymour says, and he italicized this, he said, "I fell in love with the gears." And I think Seymour recognized it wasn't that the best objects to think with are also objects you can relate to and objects you can engage with and objects you can care about. So he fell in love with the gears, and that's what made the gears so special. And why he was able to learn those mathematical ideas was because he fell in love with the gears. And I think he tried to do similar things when he invented Logo, along with others here. A central object in Logo was the turtle. And so with Logo, you give commands to the turtle, and you have the turtle, you tell it to go forward, and it moves forward, and to turn, and it turns. So you can relate to the turtle as an object, like your own body. So you draw on your own personal experience with your body, and you learn programming, not in some abstract way of doing calculations, but by interacting with an object you could care about, the turtle. I think we've also tried to keep that in mind in all of our work. When we developed Scratch, Scratch is, the sprite of Scratch is sort of the central object. And we made Scratch, we might call very sprite-centric. In fact, there's not even an easy way to sort of be the conductor of saying, I want this is what all the different objects should do. In Scratch, you sort of go inside the object, and inside all the programming in Scratch, you say, what should this sprite do? What should this object do? So you can imagine yourself as a sprite, and you give the commands for what you want the sprite to do. So again, very much we want to turn that into objects to think with, and objects to care about, and objects to engage with. Seymour also chose the objects like the turtle in order to help highlight what he would call powerful ideas. Because it wasn't just a matter of becoming engaged with these objects, but for learning deep and important ideas from your engagement with these objects. In fact, the subtitle to Seymour's book, Mindstorms, was Children, Computers, and Powerful Ideas. And actually, 20 years after the publication of Mindstorms, it came out in 1980. In 2000, he wrote a paper where he lamented the fact that people didn't pay enough attention to that third phrase. He said, people pay attention to children and computers. More children are using computers now, but it's usually missing the powerful ideas. And for Seymour, the powerful ideas were always central. And when Seymour talked about powerful ideas, he was talking about ideas that can cut across different disciplines. It wasn't an idea that could just help you do one thing, but ideas that could help you in many different things. Ideas that could help you learn other things. Ideas that could help you learn about learning itself. So he was always looking to see how can we sort of engage people with a core set of powerful ideas that can help them in all of their learning. So like he would often give example of a scientific concept like feedback, which used to be studied only at the university level at places like MIT. But he said new technologies could let children start playing with this idea. And it was an idea that cuts across. It's not just an idea that you should think about in an engineering curriculum at MIT, but it's used in your everyday life. Feedback, certainly it is a way of understanding how your thermostat works in the heating system. When it gets colder, it turns on the heat. When it gets warmer, it turns off the heat. That's a type of feedback. But also, the way we walk is feedback. If you start to lean one way, your body adjusts the other way. The way things inside of our body work is about feedback systems. That when something starts to get out of whack one way, the body reinforces an alternate way to bring it back in line. So this idea of feedback was something that he saw as important. And I think one reason he was so excited when we connected the Logo programming language to Lego, it gave more ways to use the sensors of Lego to explore that type of powerful idea. So Seymour's always looked at those powerful ideas. And again, I think in Scratch, we've tried to also do that. Like inheriting from Logo, a core idea was the modularity. So it's not just a matter of writing a program to get something done, but giving you new strategies for thinking, strategies for solving problems, strategies for designing projects, to be able to break down complex things into simpler parts, to take small building blocks and make more complex things. Or the idea of debugging is a powerful idea. Actually, I thought it was lovely when Taryn was talking about her experience with debugging and when she used Scratch, that it's okay that things go wrong, and then you figure out and you play around with it to see how to fix it. And that's part of the process. So that idea of debugging was also something that I think Seymour saw as a powerful idea and that we tried to highlight in Scratch and give people ways that they can play around, experiment. It's okay for things to go wrong. But then to try to figure out how could I make changes in that. And that debugging the project is also a way of debugging your own thinking. So it's a way to think about your own thinking, which is something that Seymour was always looking to support. A fourth idea was related to Samba schools. So Seymour did not invent Samba schools, but he was very influenced by Samba schools. In one of the later chapters in Mindstorms, Seymour talks about going to Brazil and observing the Samba schools. And I think this chapter was important because especially when Seymour was writing Mindstorms, most people thought of computers in a very individual way. It was before the internet. And in fact, it was called the personal computer. It's your personal machine. You interact with the machine. You do things. And that's the way most people thought about the computers that were entering lives. But Seymour saw the computer should be part of a broader culture and that learning was always situated within a broader culture. And he points to the example of the Samba schools where they're planning the different dances for the festival in Rio and in other cities in Brazil. And he talked about that it wasn't just you come and you take a class to learn something, how to make a float or how to do a dance, but as the community came together and everybody was learning with and from one another. So it was a way to bring people together, not just with an instructor delivering information or instruction to a learner, but a whole community coming together, learning with and from one another. And Seymour had the vision that that's how computers should enter the world as well. And he was ahead of his time because the technology wasn't quite there yet. The internet certainly has helped support that over time and had a deep influence on us as we worked on Scratch. The Scratch online community, we see it as a type of Samba school of bringing together kids from around the world and adults too, who will share not just projects, but share ideas with each other, mentoring each other, doing tutorials the way that Taryn was talking about. So this idea of learning with and from one another is a key part of what Seymour was talking about. Seymour loved the phrase hard fun. He said he took it from what he heard from kids. When kids were using Logo, he said they would often say, well, it's hard, but it's fun. And that resonated with Seymour because Seymour said too often people think that kids want things easy. And he said that's wrong. Kids are willing to do things that are hard as long as it's things they care about. And he said, when kids lose interest in school, it's not because it's too hard, it's because they find it boring. He said, what you need to do is to have things that, that they are deeply engaged with, and they're willing to tackle difficult challenges. And I think he would be skeptical. Right now, there is more of an interest in the education world of bringing some sort of fun into the learning process. But sometimes it's by just sprinkling sugar on top, that if you do something, you then get a reward. And that's not at all what Seymour meant by hard fun. He meant something where the fun came from the deep engagement with the thing you were creating, with the ideas you were exploring, the ideas that you were grappling with and playing with. And again, this time that we always try to do, both in Scratch and the way we introduce Scratch, is to connect to both interests and ideas, to make sure that we connect to young people's interests, to connect to where they are with their interests and what they're interested in doing, but also connect with the powerful ideas. So to always make sure, and we see that kids are willing to work hard, persist in the face of challenges and difficulties if they're working on things they care about and ideas that they care about. The final phrase, epistemological pluralism. It's a mouthful. I couldn't even fit it on one line on the slide. So, and this is a phrase that actually Seymour developed with his colleague Sherry Turkle, another professor here at MIT and a longtime collaborator with Seymour. And it very much connects with the theme of this conference, many paths, many styles. What they meant by epistemological pluralism is multiple ways of knowing, multiple ways of understanding the world, multiple ways of understanding yourself. And I think Seymour was always concerned that there was too much of uniformity in the world, that too often schools privileged certain ways of knowing. And for people who were very good at that way of knowing, they succeeded at school and were happy at school, but it left aside so many others. And Seymour was always saying, it doesn't have to be that way. There's not just that one way of knowing. As an example, he often talked about two forms of engagement. In the paper he wrote with Sherry called Epistemological Pluralism, they talked about planning and tinkering, where planning is an approach where you come up with a problem, you sort of analyze the problem, you come up with a solution, you try it out, and you assess it. With tinkering, you see something, you're not quite sure how it's going to work, you try something out, it doesn't quite work, you try to debug it, you try something else, and you keep on iterating to try to come up with something better. And Seymour says too much of school and society privileges planning. And planning is useful. This is not a put down of planning. It's useful to do planning. But he said in some situations, and for some people, tinkering is a much better approach. So this idea of valuing many paths and many styles was an important part. And again, in developing Scratch, that was important for us. We didn't want Scratch to be something just for kids who already would have gotten involved in coding and programming. We wanted to reach out to everybody from all different interests, all different styles, all different backgrounds, to have many different pathways. So we try to set up the way Scratch is and the type of materials we develop around it to have multiple pathways into Scratch, to make sure that everybody, especially those who normally wouldn't have been engaged in these types of activities in the past, that everyone feels comfortable engaging and excited about engaging in these ideas. These ideas sort of, again, I mentioned Mindstorm, which is a classic book. I mean, if there's one thing to remember from this, if you haven't read Mindstorms, I really encourage you to go out and read Mindstorms. It was written in 1980, 36 years ago. You have to recognize some things feel a little out of date. Writing about computers in 1980, it's hard to predict exactly what the world's going to be like in 2016. But for me, what's more striking is how much is still so relevant to today, and how much of what Seymour writes about with learning in children is so true to the issues of today. So, although so sadly Seymour is no longer with us, I think the challenge for all of us is to make sure that Seymour's spirit stays alive, and that what we do at this conference and beyond is one of the ways that we can contribute to make sure that Seymour's ideas and Seymour's spirit stay alive and healthy and grow and spread around the world. Thank you.